This is George Whitten with Worthy News. It is October 30th, 2023. The title of this episode is Will the Real Elijah Stand Up? And so in this episode, I'm going to talk about things that should be interesting to you because it's never talked about, but I believe I can prove to you in Scripture that there's a battle of Elijahs coming. That there's a real misconception, I believe, on what the coming covenant is. Is it really a peace treaty? I think I can show you some insights about that in prophecy. And then finally, what is the great delusion? So this episode is going to be a unique episode. I encourage you to spend some time watching and rewatching it. This is actually in essence to a question that a reader had. Can you explain in detail the Ezekiel warn why you believe it's at the end of the tribulation, and how do you see the last days playing out in prophecy, and can you slow down? So I will attempt to slow down. The first thing I want you to understand is as we talk about these things prophetically, my heart really is evangelism. I don't want my thoughts about prophecy to be first. It really is secondary, even third in my list of things. For example, no one remembers who H. Grattan Guinness is. He was a very famous prophecy writer, but in the 1800s. But everyone knows who Dale Moody is. Everyone knows who Charles Finney is. And so the great revivalists, I believe that we're going to make our mark in history by the amount of souls that we come into the kingdom. The mandate doesn't change no matter what season you're in. It doesn't matter where we are. But the mandate is to go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you, and lo, I'm with you always, even until the end of the age. So he's going to be with us. And the real people that are going to make their mark in eternity, I believe, is what it says in Daniel 12. Those that are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those that turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So I want to make sure we keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing is the salvation of the world. And look, I don't have all the answers, and please don't let my thoughts of prophecy, divide the body. We have enough splits and divisions over issues that are non-essential, that are not dealing with salvation or the kingdom. I really believe that in the understanding of revival, like the Moravians taught it, they said, in essentials unity, in non-essentials liberty, but in all things love. And what that means is in essentials, what are the essentials? The Word of God is the Word of God, that Jesus is the Messiah, is the way, the truth, and life, that He rose again from the dead, and believing in Him and turning from your sin and trusting in Him alone to save you. That's salvation. To confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that thou shalt be saved. That's the core essence of the gospel. That doesn't change. I don't believe in ecumenicalism. I don't believe that all faiths come together in forsaking doctrine. I think that doctrine has to be fundamental, has to be understanding of who we are. But there's some doctrines that are non-essential, and in non-essentials liberty, what I mean by that is that you'll have great many discussions and debates that are like, is drinking a glass of wine okay? You have a lot of different people that'll get very enticed over that discussion, and it's a debatable subject. And then finally, in liberty, in all things love. The main thing is that we can't lose our love over all these things. We have to understand why prophecy was given to us. Prophecy was given to us for a building, encouragement, and comfort. It was never meant to freak us out. It was actually to give us an encouragement. We have to recognize that we're in this season, right, where you're going to be blessed if you start to understand prophecy. Revelation was written in such a way that the beginning of Revelation, the end of Revelation is a chiasm. It's chiastic, and it means that how it started is how it ends, and it's unfolding a whole mystery. And it starts out in Revelation 1:3, blessed is the one who reads and hears the words of this prophecy, and the ones keeping the things written therein, for the time is near. And it's the same thing at the end of the book. Behold, I come quickly. Blessed is he that keeps the words of the prophecy of this book. So prophecy isn't meant not to be studied. It's meant to be studied. It's meant to be understood. But we have to also understand that at the end of the age, when the Lord said, tell us when these things will be and what will be the sign of your coming at the end of the age, He said the very first thing is take heed that no man deceive you. The very first thing that deception comes in is when you think you can't be deceived. We have to come to realization that we should be testing everything that we believe and everything that we think against the Word of God that does not change. And the reality is my theology is always adjusting. As I learn more and more, In reality, I may look back on this video 5 years from now and delete it because of the errors that I find in it. Why? Because I'm simply a man, fallible, but a man that is seeking after the very heart of God, seeking truth. Look, I don't have all the answers, but my quest is for truth. And I'm coming from a position where, I'm coming from an understanding that the Messiah is everything. And if you got that figured out, then everything else will work itself out. So, in reaching Jewish people for the gospel, you have to understand what they believe, how they think, why they don't believe. So I spent a lot of time studying a lot of different things, and things from a Hebraic understanding. In the Gog-Magog war, which is an interesting passage here, this particular passage gives you two different time frames within the same passage, giving you an indication it very well may be a twofold prophecy. Part of this is in verse 38, it says, in the latter years, and that's the phrase, Achrit Shanim, in the end of years. Now, at the same time, in verse 16, it says, it shall be like this in the latter days. This is Achrit Hayamim, and this is in the end of days. Now, the first phrase, in the end of years, I believe is connected to the passage in Revelation, where it says, at the end of 1,000 years, Satan was released out of his pit, and he went to so forth to deceive the nations. Well, at that time, the Messiah is ruling and reigning for 1,000 years. That's how you can have perfect peace. That's how you have a land without walls or gates. But at the same time, I believe when the Antichrist comes, he'll try to prove that the Gog-Magog war is being fulfilled through him. This is why we really need to study the Gog-Magog war. I believe in the future we very well may see the wall that's outside of Bethlehem come down. There's a huge wall that goes around many parts of Israel. Most of the division inside of Israel is a fence. However, there are huge walls. And I remember what it was like in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell. I was graduating high school, and we thought this is the end of the Cold War. There's going to be peace on the earth. And so I do believe that there is a deception coming. That's why we really need to study the Gog-Magog war. At the same time, there are things that don't fit at the end of the millennium. For example, why would you need to clean up bodies for 7 years? Why would you burn weapons for 7 years? Why, if there's a new heaven and new earth, why would you do any of that? So that does make sense at the end of the tribulation. That's how I think that 16 fits in this. Now, a lot of people say, well, I've never seen a commentator actually say anything about a twofold prophecy, or I believe, quite frankly, that the book that we're reading and this word that we study is actually still sealed even now. I think that as we continue to go forward in study, and as we continue to study the word, that the book is going to become more unsealed, just like Daniel said. And the Lord said to Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. That we weren't really supposed to fully understand what was being unsealed and what things are happening until they're actually happening. And we got to come to this realization that we have to study this word. Why? Because the days are coming when there's a famine across the world. It's not a famine of bread, but nor thirst of water, but the hearing of the words of the Lord. And they shall wander from sea to sea, from north to east. They shall run to and fro, seeking the word of the Lord, and shall not find it. So there's coming a time when the word of God is going to be hard to find. Now, the first thing I want you to understand, the Gog-Magog war is not being played now. Actually, none of the nations that are quote-unquote involved are even involved in this war. And the main thing I want you to understand in this war, and I did this in a previous video, is that the nations that you would think would be involved are actually not involved at all. There's actually no mention of any Middle East countries except for Sheba and Dan, which would be Saudi Arabia. There's no mention of any nations. I believe that the Gog-Magog war, the war that sets up that war, is actually completed in this war, in the Daniel 11 war. When it talks about a king attacking, the king and attacking. Now, there are commentators that believe there are two kings. It's a king in the king of the north and the king of the south. There's others that think there's a king in the north, a king in the south, and someone in between. Personally, I think we have to just wait and see. The reality is I don't worry about the king of the north so much, because we have to understand that the northern country gets wiped out anyway. So whether you believe there's a king of the north or there's not a king of the north, and it's really not something you have to really concern yourself with until we actually get to that point. But the main thing about this war is that this king of the south, which we really find out later is Egypt, comes against him. And it comes against him like a whirlwind, and he enters into the glorious land. Well, what happens is he comes into Israel, and now it says that many countries shall be overthrown. That this war is going to end up having many countries overthrown. And then if you continue reading on verse 44, this is where it gets interesting. It says, but news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore should go forth with a great fury to destroy and annihilate many. He actually goes to wage war against Islam. This is why I do not believe that the Antichrist is Islamic. I believe that you do have the battle of Antichrist, that you actually have multiple bad guys fighting. You have a very bad guy. One is definitely in Egypt. That's the king of the south. We know that for sure. The king of the north may be an Assyrian. It may be someone from Syria. That's why I'm hesitant to go ahead and call. There's a lot of people that think that the destruction of Damascus is coming. That's why I'm waiting to see if that's going to take place, because I do believe that destruction of Damascus could be because of this war, because it could be the king of the north. That's something we'll just have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see how these things play out. But the bottom line is that we have a destruction of many people. It says he would destroy many countries, and he would destroy and annihilate many. I believe that where this is happening is really could be in context with a different picture of the Psalm 83 war. Now, there's some that say the Psalm 83 war happened in the 1948 war. That very well may be true. However, I do believe how this fits in with the Daniel 11 war very easily. If you look at the nations involved, those are the nations that are not involved, except for the Ishmaelites, that are not involved in the Gog-Magog war. Now, it may be that some of the Ishmaelites are, because if you actually study how they want to redivide the Middle East, they actually want to divide Saudi Arabia. But that's another video. You have to watch that. I call that the something about the kings of the East. Anyway, so this is where I believe that the nations get destroyed. It's in the Daniel 11 war. This is the war that sets up the Gog-Magog war. I don't believe this is happening now. There's countries that are not involved. For example, the Hagarenes, that's the Egyptians, are not involved in this war. The Ammon, Moab, and Edom, that's Jordan. They're not involved yet in this war. Gibal and Terah could be. Why? Because that's Lebanon. It's, Hezbollah. But there's things that don't really fit. So that's kind of where I see that being played out. Now, let's go ahead and continue talking about the Gog-Magog war. Another thing you have to understand is that there's going to be a great feast. This in a Gog-Magog says, look, speak to every sort of bird and come to my sacrificial meal. And when you come to my sacrificial meal, you're going to eat the flesh of the mighty and the flesh of the... This is the exact same parallel. Talking about the Lord's return in Revelation 19. The armies followed him on white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. And what does he say in verse 17? Say to all the birds that fly in mid-heaven, come and gather together to the supper of the great God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings and the flesh of the commanders and the flesh of... That's the exact same terminology. Notice this, when he comes, he's coming on the clouds of heaven. This actually fits the Matthew 24 passage. For as lightning comes out of the east and shines to the west, so shall be the coming of the Son of Man. Notice this in verse 20. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered. What's he talking about? There's a lot of people that they read this passage not connected to the Gog-Magog war, and they come out with a lot of interesting, understandings of this verse. I think this is actually just telling you, in conjunction, this is connected to Gog-Magog. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun shall be dark, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Then shall the Son of Man, then shall the sign of the Son of Man shall appear in the heavens. And then all the tribes of the earth shall mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man come in the clouds of heaven with great power and great glory. So, the first thing as we get into this, I want you to understand, I'm coming from this from a very messianic centric understanding. In reaching Jewish people, you have to understand what they believe, how they think, what they don't believe. So I've spent a lot of time studying the Talmud. But if your life is not centered on Yeshua, you're going to get sidetracked. You're going to even get delusioned by the Talmud. There are parts in this message that Jews won't even let men investigate until they're 30 years old. And I want you to understand that in this passage here in Revelation 5, it says, in the midst of the throne, in the midst of heaven, was a lamb that was slain. And it said, to the Lamb, you are worthy to take the scroll, to take the book, to open its seals, for you were slain, you redeemed us to God by your blood, and out of every kindred and tongue and power and people and nation, that the redemption of God and the plan of God is centered on the Lamb of God, on Yeshua, on Jesus that died from the foundation of the world. And guess what? It says in verse 11 or verse 12, and all of heaven, verse 11, all of heaven, and the myriads upon thousands, said in verse 12, worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. And I heard every creature which is in heaven and on earth, under the earth, and those in the sea, and all those to them, blessing and honor and glory and power be to him sitting on the throne and to the Lamb forever and ever. So if all of heaven was centered on who Yeshua is, then Yeshua has to be the central of our understanding when we try to study the Talmud. Study the Torah or the Haftorah, the prophets. If we study the Old Testament without him being the center, we're going to get sidetracked this way and that way. And when we look at the Talmud, we have to understand that these are written by people that didn't have Yeshua as a center. So there's going to be insights in the Talmud that gives you an understanding of what they're expecting that will help us understand how things fit, because in the future, it is the Jewish people that are going to be deceived for a season. So I want to go ahead and go through some of this. This is a Talmudic passage, and it says here, is written there with regard to Messiah, behold, I'm sending you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of God. Now, when they go ahead and talk about this great day of God, they connect this to the Gog-Magog war. It says later on in this Talmudic passage, the Gemara derived from the one who is rescued from the war of Gog-Magog by means of a verbal analogy. It is written here with regard to Shabbat day. It is written here as with regard to the Gog-Magog, to the war of Gog and Magog day, shall be on that day, on the day that Gog arrives in the land of Israel. So they connect, ready? The coming of Elijah connected with the Gog-Magog war. Now, I want you to understand, if you don't understand the Gog-Magog war and the timing of it, this is part of the reason why so many people believe the Gog-Magog war is happening now. It's actually setting up for their deception. There's coming a prophet. His name is Elijah, mind you. Now, the next thing I want you to understand is this, that it cannot be now. Why? Ezekiel 39:7 says something very particular here. So I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let them profane my holy name anymore. So the name of God will not be profaned. That means there's no more blasphemy. However, in Revelation 13, it is very clear that the false beast was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And he was given authority. He was allowed to. That means the Lord allows him to do this, right? And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, to tabernacle on those who dwell in heaven. And in Daniel 7:25, it's the same thing. And he will speak words against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Most High. And then how long does this happen for? It says for a time, 2 times and a half a time, or 3.5 years. I'm using the Amplified version, so it's clearly written out. You can read that in another version. But the main point is this: there's 3.5 years that's connected to this. Now, I want you to understand that this deception, the profaning of God, I want you to understand, and I want you to grab hold of this concept, because it says in Revelation 2, verse 3, that no one deceive you by any means. That means deception is everywhere. And the Lord, Paul is instructing us just as the Lord instructed us in Matthew 24. Don't let anyone deceive you. First, there's a falling away. This word falling away is apostia. It means an apostasy. It means a turning away of the faith. Okay, now I want you to understand that. A turning away of the faith. First, the Son of Man, this man of sin is revealed. The son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, this is key. I want you to understand that here is the Lord And he says this in John 5. I've come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, him you will receive. This is the Lord talking to Jewish people, talking about, you don't receive me as the Messiah. There's someone else coming in my name. Listen to this. Him you will receive. He's going to come. Now look, I didn't go through all the church father quotes. I have a lot of church father quotes. But one thing is, and I'm going to use the Didache, and this is Didache 16 verse 9. It talks about when in verse 7, as the lawlessness increases, they that shall hate one another and shall persecute and betray. And then the world deceiver shall appear as a son of God, and shall work signs and wonders, and the earth shall be delivered in his hands, and he shall do unholy things which have never been since the world began. When we talk about blasphemy, and if the Jews are going to accept him, they're not going to accept him blaspheming Adonai or Yud-He-Vav-He. They would go ahead and blaspheme, believing that Yeshua is a demon. Think about this. I want to show you something. This is what it says in Mark 3. And the scribes came down from Jerusalem, and they said, he has Beelzebub, and by the ruler of demons he casts out demons. So the Lord speaks to him in parables, and he says to him, how can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. Continues on. But I want you to see what it says in verse 28. As surely I say to you, all sins will be forgiven the sons of men, and whatever blasphemies they may utter. But he who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness, but is subject to eternal condemnation, because they said he has an unclean spirit. What is the blasphemy that has taken place in Revelation 13? What is the blasphemy that the Jews would accept? I live in Israel. They don't say Yeshua, they call him Yeshu, which is an acronym which means may his name be erased. Now this is really going to be, why I really strive to express and explain the deity of the Messiah. Because the reality is that it is the Antichrist that is projecting himself to be the Son of God. That he's projecting himself to be Jesus. That is the ultimate blasphemy. That is what's taking place. And what he's going to say is he's going to say that Jesus, when he did these things in the first century, he did it by the power of demons. Why? Because in the reality is that when the Antichrist comes on the scene, he's going to be doing his power by the power of demons. It's like the projection. And so the blasphemy is actually saying that Jesus performed these signs and these miracles through Satan. It's projection. We see it all the time in politics today. And he's going to go ahead and try to take the place of the Son of God, and he's going to twist every Old Testament prophecy concerning the Messiah, and he'll try to make it about himself. This is why we have to understand what's taking place. I want to continue reading this, because we have to understand that in the last days there are going to be false apostles, deceitful worshipers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. For no wonder Satan transformed himself into an angel of light. So this deception is going to come. It's going to appear like an angel of light. And we read in Revelation 13, right? The dragon, Satan, gave him his power, his throne, his great authority, and saw one of his heads as it had been mortally wounded. And his deadly wound was healed. And the world marveled and followed the beast. Then in verse 11, there was another beast that came out of earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. So that's the false prophet. Do you think the false prophet is going to come saying, I'm the false prophet? This is the Antichrist. No, he's going to come on as though he's fulfilling the prophecies of what the Jews are expecting. Now, this passage here, I'm going to break this up into two, but this is from Legends of the Jews. For those that do not know, Louis Ginsburg wrote this in 1909, and what he did was he took portions of the Talmud and created stories. And within the Talmudic passage, or within the story, he would go ahead and show where he got these things from the Talmud. These are all within the Talmud, and this is his story. Elijah's preparatory work will begin 3 days before the advent of Messiah. They don't appear in Palestine, so it's in Israel somewhere, right? And will utter lament over the devastation of the Holy Land, and his wail will be heard throughout the world. And the last words of his elegy will be, "Now peace will come upon the earth." Well, that sounds a whole lot like 1 Thessalonians 5, when they say, "Peace, peace," then sudden destruction comes. And when evildoers hear this message, they will rejoice. On the second day, he will appear again and proclaim, "Good will come upon the earth." And third, his promise will be heard. Salvation will come upon the earth. Then Michael will blow the trumpet, and once more Elijah will make his appearance, this time to introduce the Messiah. To make sure the identity of the Messiah, the Jews will demand that he perform the miracle of resurrection before their eyes, reviving such of the dead as they had known personally. But the Messiah will do 7 wonders. He will bring Moses and the generation of the desert to life. I will go through these things. Now, the next thing it says this. It says, he will show 3 holy vessels from the temple, the ark, the flask of manna, and the cruse of sacred oil. Now, this is why I always am hesitant about when people are searching for the ark and searching for things, because I already understand this passage. I understand this is one of the signs that's going to bring deception. Now, I'm not saying that those that are searching, are purposely doing this. It's just something I already know. I already know what is written for them. But notice this. Then the Jews will know that Elijah is the Elijah promised them, and the Messiah introduced by them is the true Messiah. Elijah's false prophet's name, or the false prophet's name, is Elijah. He's going to be, this is why it's going to be so deceptive. Now, the second thing is that he's going to be coming to them. He's going to show them the son of David. Listen, that's why I don't believe the Pope is the false prophet, because he's not Jewish. I don't believe he's a Muslim, because he's not going to prove from the son of David. No Jew is going to believe that a Muslim. I do believe that it's a Muslim guy that's fighting in the battle, what I call the battle of the Antichrist in the Daniel 11 war. That's why I don't think it's Donald Trump. A lot of people think that Donald Trump's the Antichrist. Well, he's not Jewish, right? That's why I don't think Barack Obama is the Antichrist. Why? Because he's not Jewish. As a matter of fact, the ancient church fathers, when they wrote and they were talking about where he's going to come from, they actually said he's probably come from the tribe of Dan, because Dan is not listed in one of the 12 tribes that are sealed. And Dan's location, his ancient ancestral location, is where Tel Aviv resides today. So, I think that we don't know who he is. And quite frankly, he may not know who he is yet either. There was a movie, The Matrix. It was kind of interesting. If you ever watched it, quote unquote, Neo didn't know he was the guy that was going to save the world until he actually died and rose again. That he died, and then, there's the kiss, and he comes, and then he realized, I have superpowers. I think that may be a little indication, a little kind of an understanding of, how he's going to come. Now, I want you to understand something, ready? Here it is in Revelation 13. It says this. I saw one of his deadly wounds were healed. Now, in the Talmud, it talks about over and over again that the children of Israel mourn over Mashiach ben Yosef, the suffering Messiah, a picture of the Antichrist. But what happens is they mourn and wail, and they don't understand why this happens. But he's brought back to life. Wouldn't it be interesting, or wouldn't it be a very real probability that when the false prophet and the false Elijah and the Antichrist come on the scene, he's going to try to counterfeit every prophecy, every messianic prophecy that Jesus had. Look what it says in Zechariah 12, right? I'll pour upon the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem in the spirit of grace and supplication, and they shall look upon me whom they pierced. Well, this is a very indication of how Yeshua became that person that was pierced. That the Antichrist will say this is about him. Why? Because he's trying to steal everything that Jesus did. He's trying to steal who he is. Look at this. In this passage here, when it talks about This is actually in a different Talmudic passage. It says, at that time, Michael, the great celestial prince, will rise and blow the shofar 3 times, and Messiah ben David and Elijah will be revealed. And the two of them will go and be at that time in the deserts of the people. And Elijah will say to them, this is the Messiah. And they will return, their hearts will be faint, and will strengthen their hand. He goes to the desert. There was something that Jesus said very particularly in Matthew 24. They'll say, go to the deserts. There's a Talmudic connection here. Now, there's a lot of people that ask me, well, how did the Jewish people not understand just by reading Daniel 9 and the 70 weeks prophecy? How could they not see that this is the Messiah? We can see in many different ways of understanding this passage that this is fulfilled by Jesus, by Yeshua, in around 30 AD. We see this over and over again. How is it they don't understand this property? Talking about the 70 weeks are determined. He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Now, you have to understand that this is what it says in the Talmud. And it says this, inasmuch as Daniel has proclaimed the matter of a deep secret, our sages have interdicted the calculation of the time of the future redemption, or the reckoning of the period of the advent of the Messiah, because the masses might be mystified and bewildered should the Messiah fail to appear as a forecast. Now, their rejection of how Jesus came and fulfilled that, they want to go ahead and say, we can't even look at it. It's too hard to understand. And notice this, ready? It says this, may the calculators of the final redemption come to grief. They actually, they say that the rabbis invoke God to frustrate and destroy those who seek to determine precisely the advent of the Messianic era, because they are a stumbling block to the people. They actually are calling people, look, don't even look at trying to figure out the timing of the Daniel passage, because if you do, you're going to go ahead and get a curse that we're giving you. I mean, I want you to think about that. That's why they don't study it. And if you actually study this and you actually understood this, you got to remember, I'm coming from the perspective of how are the Jewish people deceived. He shall confirm a covenant. Well, what's a covenant? I believe, right, that the 1 week is not, he's not saying I'm signing a 7-year peace deal. I believe that this false covenant of death, it says in Isaiah 28, this false covenant of death is actually a 7-year period that God's giving us a timeline, an indication it's a 7-year period. What's going to happen? I believe that the false prophet and the Antichrist are going to say, this is the new covenant. Now, we go ahead and we know that Jesus came and gave us a new covenant. Well, they're going to say, no, we're bringing this new covenant. Look what it says in this particular passage. This is in Radak, another Talmudic passage. Behold, the days are coming, a new covenant. Regarding this, it says that from the prophet Jeremiah, prophesies about a new Torah, which in the future will come to be. Now, this new Torah, this repentance and returning has renewed for them. And behold, it says the explanation, or how it's not according to the covenant that I made with their father, that the covenant that they broke, right? Continuing on, it says that the Torah of Moses, my servant, which I commanded in Horeb for all of Israel, both my statutes and judgments, the whole section will be in the future. Just as it seals, behold, I send you Elijah the prophet. Elijah's going to go ahead and explain this. This is another passage. And this is in Zohar. This is a passage that Jewish men aren't even allowed to read until they're 30. And so it is said of Aaron, he shall be thy spokesman, for I was slow of speech and slow of tongue. For the Holy One, blessed is he, made me slow of speech in the oral law and slow of tongue in the written law. So in the future to come, Elijah will be my spokesman, and he will come and settle all doubts and explain them to us at that time. So that Elijah's going to come. He's going to go ahead and explain everything, and he's going to explain it. Now, this is another passage in talking about the Ezekiel temple, because the dimensions don't fit. And it says, Rabbi Yochanan said, look, this passage is indeed difficult, and in the future, Elijah the prophet will interpret it. So that, ready, when this new temple, this thing is coming, this abomination of desolation is coming, this false temple that's coming, guess what? You don't have to worry about how it doesn't fit, like Ezekiel says. Don't worry about that. Elijah, who's Elijah to them at that time? It's going to be the false prophet. He's going to explain this. Look what it says continuing down. Most people don't realize that the book of Ezekiel was almost thrown out of the canon. And there was actually this passage in the Talmud. It says, Rabbi Yehuda said, indeed, that this man is remembered for good. And Hananiah ben Hezekiah was his name, because were it not for him, the book of Ezekiel would have been suppressed. It would have been suppressed. It would have been thrown out. Why did they wish to suppress it? Because they found that its words contradicted the words of Torah. As its latter chapters contain many halakha that appear not according to those of the Torah. Why? Because it's a new covenant. You can't understand the whole period of Ezekiel 40-48 if Yeshua is not your center of understanding. And I use this understanding actually to really share with Jewish people. You have to understand that there's a deception coming. There's a falling away. What's a falling away? An apostasy. What's apostasy? I want you to think about this. What's the apostasy? The falling away. The man of sin is revealed. So he's coming. Remember, he's coming as a son of God. He's going to go ahead and sit in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Notice this. And the coming of the lawless one was according to the workings of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. What is that? That's the rejection that Jesus is the true Messiah. And for this reason, God will send a strong delusion that they should believe the lie. Now, what is the lie? I believe there's a lot of people that have come to church, that have heard the message of the Gospels, but they rejected the message because of how they perceived church. They perceived men. They weren't looking at who the Messiah is. They were looking at the world around them and said, this isn't what I anticipated. But ready? Here comes this other guy. He's actually going to show these signs and wonders. And there's going to be a lot of people that were, quote unquote, in the church that will be caught up by the deception. What's the delusion, I believe? I believe the delusion is that he is the Son of God, sitting in the temple, that he resurrected from the dead. And he's going to do all these things. And this is the great delusion, I believe. The great delusion that they should believe the lie. That they might all be condemned who did not believe the truth. So while a lot of people are looking for different kinds of delusions and a lot of different speculations, I think I have a pretty good case for the fact that delusion is the false resurrection and the false Messiah, and a lot of people that don't know the true Messiah, that have maybe a head knowledge but not a heart knowledge, have never been transformed by the gospel, are going to go ahead and see these things and say, this is the true Messiah. And they're going to believe, what's the lie? That Jesus did all these great things in 30 AD. They were all from demons. That he wasn't the true Messiah. He wasn't the true Messiah. They're going to say that he did this demonically powered. But in reality, it's the opposite. It's Satan, demonically powered, that rises himself up from the dead, that he shows signs and wonders. If it were possible to deceive even the elect, I believe that could be the delusion that's coming. If you read this carefully, when we talk about a new covenant, then we're talking about what? A new understanding of the Talmud, a new understanding of the Torah. In this passage in Luke, it says there was great earthquakes in various places, famines and pestilence, and there was great fearful signs and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you and deliver you up to the synagogues. Deliver you up to the synagogues. That's a very interesting choice of words the Lord uses. Why? I believe we're going to have a false Babylonian system. Remember, the Talmud was brought out of Babylon. And this isn't biblical Judaism. When Yeshua came, he presented to us a pure understanding of what the Torah explains to us. And what Babylonian, the Talmud, within it, is a lot of things that the Lord was really, in great conflict with the Pharisees and the Sadducees in the first century. Why? Because the Talmudic understanding was a stumbling block for people getting saved. Well, you continue on this. The children of Israel will fly on wings of eagles and come to the Messiah. He comes on the clouds of heaven. They're going to go ahead and they're going to say that this is the fulfillment of the Daniel passage. When he says it, and he comes on the clouds of heaven. We understand this is the Lord coming back, but they're going to go ahead and twist all these different passages. And look at this. A pillar of fire will come forth from the temple, and it will be a portent to all those seeing it, proving that just now the temple has been completed, and they will know and be convinced. Fire come down. Well, that's exactly how how Solomon's temple was. And so this is the thing. And then another aspect of all this, I don't have time to get into that, but I want to jump into this. Elijah and the prophet, Elijah the prophet and Messiah ben David, Elijah the false prophet and Messiah ben David, the Antichrist, will come and give us tidings of the building of the temple and the restoration of Jerusalem. And they let us say, Amen. Elijah the prophet, the man who is zealous for the name of God, the man who was giving tidings of peace, the man will come and atone for the children of Israel. Elijah the prophet. That's a song. Now we understand there's a true Elijah coming before the Lord's return. Now, I really have to jump into the temple. The temple they're building, or the temple they're attempting to build, actually does not fit on the Temple Mount at all. The Temple Mount proper. Now, this is a layout, and I believe that the temple on the left, Ezekiel's temple, is actually even bigger than this. But I'm pulling this out to give you an understanding that you can see the tabernacle is very, very small. That's the smallest object to the far right. It's in brown. The next size temple was Solomon's temple. That's to the left, above it. Okay, it's above what that green square is. The green square is an American football field. Now, above that in orange is the Herod's temple, and they called this the rebuilding that Herod did. The expansion of the complex that Herod did was a huge expansion, and you can see that this is only about a quarter of the sample size that this particular person is laid out in a geographic, or not a geographic, but a layout here. I actually believe this is actually bigger than this. The actual temple proper is probably more like 7 to 9 miles in diameter in each side. Now, one passage that I like to pull out to explain isn't necessarily the temple, but the land that was allotted to the temple, because the land allotted to the temple is even bigger. In this particular passage, this is actually a commentary you'll find in Matthew Henry, and he says this: in breadth one way, about 80 miles one way and 30 miles another way. So some 25 miles one way and 10 miles the other. That's the courtyard. To give you an understanding, this is a map that's 25 by 10. You can see that it actually engulfs all of Jerusalem. The next thing is 80 by 30. This engulfs all of, it really goes into the sea. And then you ask, well, how could this be? Well, you have to understand, when the Lord comes back in Zechariah 14, he puts his feet on the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is going to split east to west. And there's a great valley. Half the mountain shall move to the north, half the mountain shall move to the south. And guess what? Every valley is exalted, meaning that every low place is raised up and every mountain is pushed down. Every mountain is laid low, and it becomes smooth. When does this happen? When the glory of the Lord is revealed, and all the flesh shall see it together. That's the Lord's return. So there's going to be a huge shift in all the land masses. Now, I don't like using this because I don't believe this is a good, accurate depiction, because the land is going to be so different that everything's going to change. But if you see the white area, you'll see that the land that was allotted for the most holy place actually goes from the river of Jordan all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Now you'll see that the sea there is the area of the city of Jerusalem. The S there is where the sanctuary is. And you can see that's kind of how big it is. It's a very huge area. It doesn't fit. It won't be understood until the Lord comes back. And even when the Lord comes back, this is actually inaccurate. I think there's a huge shift going on, but that's another story. But the main thing is this: that we talk about the abomination of desolation. First, there's an abomination of desolation. So when the false image of the beast comes up, there's going to be a major shift with the Jewish people, because for the first period, they're going to believe that he is the Messiah. And they're actually going to be persecuting the saints that are here. And then it says what? Then after this is a great tribulation like there's never been since the beginning of the world. What is happening here? Well, you have to understand that in the middle of the week, the abominations shall be the one that makes desolate. That's in the middle of the week. So that 3.5 years, there's a period that has changed. And now it says that there was place prepared for the woman in the wilderness. I did this in a different video. I believe that it's Edom, Moab, and Ammon. I believe it's the same wilderness wanderings of Moses. That's the same area that is separated in the Daniel 11 passage. And there she was for 1,260 days. Well, hey, that's the same period of the of the true prophets. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy how long? 1,260 days. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. If anyone wants to harm me, he must be killed in this manner. And they had the power to shut up heaven so that there is no rain. No rain falls in the days of their prophecy. And they have power over the waters to turn into blood and strike the earth with all the plagues as often as they desire. Now, there's a great debate whether or not the 2 prophets are Elijah and Enoch or Elijah and Moses. Either one, it doesn't matter. We don't know. If the Lord doesn't mention it, we shouldn't spend a whole lot of time speculating. However, one of these is Elijah. So can you imagine the scene? The false Elijah, the false prophet, and the true Elijah. It is the battle of the Elijahs. Will the true Elijah stand up? If you read how Elijah's life was, there was times when an army came to him, and he called down fire from heaven and wiped them out. The 3rd time he said, look, I know that you're Elijah. No, don't kill me. Please, I just need to relay a message. And Elijah doesn't destroy the 3rd time that an army is sent to him. But it's a very interesting passage. This is talking about fire from heaven. What did Elijah do? He shut up. There was no rain. He had the power to shut up rain for 3.5 years. That's what it's talking about here. In the days of their prophecy. What is that? 3.5 years. Well, that would fulfill the first 3.5 years that he did, and 3.5 years, a 7-year of Shemitah, that this could be a connection here. So I do believe one is for sure Elijah, the true Elijah. And at the same time, there's a false Elijah. Can you imagine the scene? Have you ever heard anyone talk about this? This is what I think about, and I think, how does anyone really think about this and think this through? I'm not saying I'm right, but I think, there's something going on here. And then in Revelation 11, they finish their testimony. The beast that sends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them and overcome them and kill them. Elijah dies. The other one dies. I personally think it's Enoch, but it's another question. But now continue reading there. And after 3.5 days, breath of life from God entered them. They stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who saw them. An amazing, amazing time that will be. So the question really is not who Elijah is, and not who, the Antichrist is, or who the false. The real question is, who do you say that Jesus is? Because, the disciples came to him, and they asked him, and Jesus said to them, who do men say that I am? And some said, well, you're Elijah. Others said, you're Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And then he says, no, but who do you say that I am? And Jesus answered and said, you're blessed, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood did not reveal to you, but my Father in heaven. I'm hoping that you get a revelation that Jesus is the true Messiah. C.S. Lewis said this, I am trying here to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, that is Christ. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on a level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with any patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Listen, you have to know who Jesus is. I believe that he is the Word that became flesh, just like it says in John 1:1. Every cult, when you read Walter Martin's book on the kingdom of cults, every cult, the main issue that they lose track of is the fact that Jesus is not the Son of God, God in the flesh. And this is the main error for every cult. That's the same error, I believe, that leads to the apostasy. It leads to the apostasy. Why? Because there's someone that's coming that's going to fake himself out. This Antichrist is going to come on the scene. He's going to show himself that he is the Son of God. He's going to do the signs and miracles and wonders. So much so that when the Antichrist says that Jesus is the one that did the Jesus that in the Bible that did these things, he did this by the power of Satan. There's going to be many people that are going to fall under that delusion because they did not receive what Jesus said. I believe that there's something coming here that's so, important to understand. I'm going to conclude with this. Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. And nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. I want you to understand that God is at work, that the nations are going to come. They're going to see the gospel. And for those that are wondering what's going to happen in this war, I believe Hamas is going to be, dealt with. Benjamin Netanyahu even said this the other day, and most people didn't understand what he said, but the word violence here is Hamas. Hamas shall no longer be heard in your land. Devastation or destruction within your borders. Recall your walls, Yeshua, salvation, and your gates, praise. So, for those that don't follow us, I have a live blogging channel on Telegram called Worthy News. It's at Worthy Watch. Follow our Telegram channel. We update that all the time. I do not post that much on Facebook. I do not post at all on Instagram. I just believe in freedom of speech, and very often, I get hindered on those particular social media platforms. The next thing is, if you don't get a Worthy brief, we send it out by email every day. Sign up for it. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. I hope you learned a lot. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I figured it all out. I just know what my word says, and I know what I've read and what I've understood, and I've tried to fit a lot of the understandings together, and I'm trying to explain it in a concise manner. I hope I did. I will probably have to look back on this video and redo it again, but it's okay. Be blessed. The Lord is coming really, really soon. Stay focused on the kingdom and stay focused on the salvation of the world. We're called to redeem people. Let's make sure our focus is the salvation. Our time is not, we don't have a whole lot of time left. Until next time, this is George Whitten reporting with Worthy News.